Okay, today we're going to talk about, obviously we're going to talk about Jerusalem. I have a few things I want to cover in advance of that. I hope you can appreciate there was a lot of things going on this week. Very, very difficult to sift through all of it. I do have a couple things, some videos I want to play. A couple of them are rather long, and I'm really going to try to keep this to an hour today so you can get out and enjoy the wonderful sunshine that we're having. I can't even see you out there today. Usually you're so bright looking at the back, I about go blind. Wow, was this ever a week where we could talk about the convergence of events? Jerusalem is a flashpoint. Jerusalem is in a very precarious position, particularly the Temple Mount with the events that happened this week. So we're going to talk about that. A couple things I want to talk about before that. Just some things that I've been reading. In Wired magazine, they had a great article. Well, great if you're, into apocalyptic type things like I am. But there's a lot of discussion about, in this article in Wired, about attacks, cyber attacks on the electric grid and the possibility of EMP. And that everybody is getting hit with massive cyber attacks everywhere. A lot of these are originating from North Korea, China, and Russia. It is putting some of our infrastructure at great risk. We hear about some of them, but some of these articles that I've been reading that talk about some of the attacks that have happened are way beyond anything that you've heard about, because they just don't talk about them. And this is a daily problem. It's getting worse. And so as we do all this great technology stuff where things are connected, and I like that. I mean, I like the internet. I like having access to all of this information and newspapers and videos, although I think we've reached a point where there's almost too much bombarding us all the time. But it has a dark side to it, a very dark side. We have the artificial intelligence things that are happening, transhumanism, and this attempt where they're trying to sort of merge technology and humans. And this raises the whole specter of things about the mark of the beast. And exactly how that plays out, we don't know for certain yet, but all of the things that we see about that, the development of these chips and implantable chips and that type of thing, are concerning to those who know the rest of the story and how that's going to play out. I'm going to make just a couple comments about American politics. I want to make say something in advance, though. I know that politics doesn't save us. The only thing that saves us is grace through faith and the cross of Jesus Christ. Amen. That's it. Okay, so we can enact all the laws we want, and we shouldn't feel comfortable about the fact that we've banned homosexuality or something like that, or we've gone back to traditional marriage. Doing that doesn't save anybody, but it does have a preserving effect on the culture, and I think that's a laudable goal, that we would try to at least preserve things. But we know that nobody here at this church believes that enacting a marriage amendment is going to save anybody. The only the way they are saved is through the gospel of Jesus Christ and through the work, full, complete, finished work that he did on the cross. So I just, I don't want people to be confused about what we might be about here, but we do talk about these current events and these things mainly to help people here in the church and elsewhere that happen to watch about things that are going on, because it is very disconcerting what's going on in the world. I mean, it is just this constant pressure for the way things are changed. And one of the places you see that is in our political environment. Now, one of the editorial cartoonists, I think he's very talented and even brilliant, is Michael Ramirez. And he had an editorial cartoon, a couple of them this week, and I'll talk a little bit about this one. This one was one that he put up. Meanwhile, in Iran, look, Russia, there is, there's a lot of misdirection going on. And even the party that seems to be in power can't get along because they are working, they're sort of, as Ramirez points out, they're pulling in opposite directions. Now, I think it's a brilliant cartoon. You have, the elephant on the one side and the, rhino on the other, and they're going in opposite directions. I think that's great. Last week we talked some about Eugene Peterson and what he's doing, and I might have a comment for that near the end if I have time. He has, and I don't remember if I got to it last week or not, he did recant coming out in favor of same-sex marriage, homosexuality, practicing homosexuals in the church, even though I played a video that showed that 3 years ago he was essentially saying the same thing. So now he's recanted it. The problem is that in the message, well, I'll go ahead and make the comments right now that I'm thinking about it. In the message, Peterson does not use the word in his translation or paraphrase of 1 Corinthians 5 or 6 or Romans chapter 1. He doesn't really talk about homosexuality. He changes it to sexual promiscuity. Now that's important because there is a guy a few years ago wrote a book called God and the Gay Christian named Matthew Vines, and he was very upset. I think I showed you some quotes from him. He was very upset that Eugene Peterson, he was excited the day he came out and said, "Oh, I'm in favor, I would perform a same-sex marriage." And Matthew Vines is a homosexual, open homosexual. He was very upset when Peterson came out 24 hours later and said, "Well, I take back what I said the day before." And part of that is because in his book, God and the Gay Christian, I'd have to go and look, but I'm pretty sure that the approach that Matthew Vines took to how homosexuality is defined in the New Testament was similar to the sexual promiscuity wording that Peterson had used in the Bible, his paraphrase or translation called The Message, and said, well, it's not homosexuality that's bad as long as you love each other, but it's sexual promiscuity that's bad. And that's just not what the text says, but that's what everybody's going. And every week, it seems like people are falling. For example, here, there was a picture of Donald Trump praying with some people, and there's some people there that I'm very uncomfortable with, like Rodney Howard-Browne, who led was one of the big proponents of the Laughing Revival that happened. That was over 20 years ago. It's hard to believe it was that long ago. Calls himself the Holy Ghost bartender, and Paula White, and those people. And then others, who I think are okay, are solid, praying with Donald Trump, but it's this mixture thing that really kind of bothers me. And you see this, it's interesting that the Judge Not crowd spend a lot of time judging people. So here's a guy from the Judge Not. I'm sure if you cornered this guy, he would say, "Oh, important verse in the Bible is judge not that you be not judged." Now they always take that out of context, but that's probably one of the most quoted verses in the Bible today. But he comes out, he's a professor at Messiah College in, is it Grantham, Pennsylvania, near Gettysburg? What is it? Mechanicsburg? Okay. Oh, okay. I didn't think it was in Mechanicsburg. I thought it was a little ways away from there, in another town. Anyway, in that area of Pennsylvania, not too far from Gettysburg. I know that's accurate. And he talks about the fact that Trump is seducing evangelicals and people that line up with Trump or support him in any way or pray for him or even might have voted for him are damaging evangelicalism beyond repair. Now, these guys never said anything about Barack Obama and his support for things that were important, that have biblical bases, same-sex marriage, abortion, that type of thing. But now, of course, they're coming out and they're judging everybody. So if you want to look this guy up at the One News Now, you can look that up and read that article. Victor Davis Hanson talks about a good commentator. Don't know if he's a believer. He makes good observations. talking about the Fifth American War. He talked about these revolutions that we've had in American history, and he believes we're in a fifth one right now with the contentious nature of things that are going on. And the interesting thing is that even though he's secular in his orientation, he makes an observation. This is just one of the clips out of the article. On the global stage, the near-religious idea of egalitarianism has all but won the war against liberty. We are all creatures of the animal farm barnyard now. And it's interesting that he says that because other people that I've quoted in the past, Dennis Prager and others and myself, believe that there's really a major religious component to this conflict in society that's going on right now, and that leftism, the egalitarianism that Hansen talks about in this article, is itself a religion. And they're as committed to their religion, and they would never admit it, but it's tearing the fabric of society apart, these things that are doing, and we are engaged in these massive social experiments that have religious components like abortion on demand, sexual, I would say it's gone beyond sexual freedom and sexual liberty to anything goes. I was talking to a medical professional, I won't say who it was this week, and I brought up the thing of transgenderism, and he just rolled his eyes, and I wouldn't identify the person because, you know, talking about this in public now can get you fired. And it's totally against science. And they're doing things like, I don't know if you read these articles, I get them sent by Facebook friends all the time. They're doing hormone treatments, massive hormone treatments to block puberty development in children. This is child abuse. And I think I read an article this week that the Olympics is pretty much thrown in the towel as trying to determine who can compete as a woman. And so what's going to happen? Transgender males are going to win all of the events that they enter because just males are stronger than females. It's true. I mean, Bruce Gender, as we like to refer to him here, might win the woman's equivalent of the decathlon. Even at being at 65 years of age, he would have a halfway decent shot. That's probably not true. But I remember John McEnroe said, Venus Williams would rank way down the list on the, if she played on the male tour, she'd be ranked about 700 in the world. And he was just savaged for his insensitive remarks. So, the solution to this funding of, I even did a debate in college, and my topic was that get rid of Title IX. Now, this is 1973 in my speech class. Just have one basketball team, one football team, and may the best person be on the team. Now, we know what would happen in that situation. And I'm not against women's sports or anything like that, so don't say that. But it's really, so we're engaged in this transgender experiment, same-sex marriage experiment, anything goes sexually, abortion experiment, abortion on demand. And then, doing things like, because we don't have people to pay the benefits for people that are retiring, we're bringing in immigrants that don't share values at all. And I'm not against immigration. We need to, things could go south in this country, and we may all be immigrants someday. Who knows? There's no assurance of that. But we have this conflict. Dennis Prager this week, he put out this tweet, and it got shared retweeted like 1 million times. And he said the news media in the West pose a far greater danger to Western civilization than Russia does. And he was savaged for that by people on the conservative side of the spectrum. You're an idiot, you've left conservatism, you've lost your mind. Bret Stephens, who I always thought was a conservative, who now writes for the New York Times, used to be with the Wall Street Journal, Jewish. I don't know if he's practicing or not. But he wrote just, oh, Dennis, way to go, Dennis. That's stupid, and they're saying things, people were saying things like, does the news media have a nuclear arsenal like Russia does pointed at us? So Dennis did say, and he made a great defense on his program this week, and he had Douglas Murray, who wrote a great book called The Strange Death of Europe, talking about the same issues. And Murray is an atheist, and he says, we've lost our Christian base for our civilization, and it's ripping us to shreds. And he's an atheist. By the way, he became an atheist because he studied Islam. And so he says Muhammad made me an atheist. And he said, he said in a debate I saw when he was talking about his book, he said, it'd be very interesting to see what would happen. I mean, I'll get ripped to shreds for that and threats on my life. What if I said Muhammad made me a Jew? That would be even way over the top. And that would, because that's not true. Now, Dennis said he would amend his tweet to say this, the news media and universities in the West. And I would agree with that. Sometimes tweeting 140 characters, you don't get all the thoughts out. And so, you can amend that. But this is where we're going. For example, this article on Bookworm Room, this is where the gay marriage battle should be fought. So back in 2008, this person wrote an article this week. He said, this is what I said back in 2008. And what he was talking about was conservative Episcopalian bishops were breaking away from the Episcopal Church because they were ordaining a homosexual. And I think it was the guy up in New Hampshire or Vermont that was going on. And he said this, the second problem right now is with the emphasis on changing the civil definition of marriage to include same-sex marriage is the risk that there will be direct challenges between church and state. What happens, though, when the church provides something which is both a core doctrinal belief, marriage, and a state right, marriage? And people were saying, well, we don't have this problem with abortion. Abortion is a civil right and hasn't impacted the church. And he goes, but this one does. And people are going to come after the church, and history has shown that that's true. He said back in 2008, it's a head-on collision. I can guarantee you that the courts will get involved and that some activist judge will state that the Catholic Church is constitutionally required to marry gay couples. He then goes on to talk about this man. This was an article in Rolling Stone a few weeks ago. The Quiet Crusader, a guy who made about $500 million by selling his company and has spent, by most estimates, about $440 million funding same-sex marriage campaigns. And one of the things that he says in this, here's the quote at the bottom, a quote from the article. 1 in 3 LGBTQ people in the U.S. lives in the South. We need to bring the freedoms we now have to them. And they've had meetings and action groups and that type of thing. And he even says this, we're going into the hardest states in the country, Gill says of the Southern Strategy for LGBTQ Rights. We're going to punish the wicked. Now, you see, if that was flipped around, oh, you can't do that, judge not. But they do it all the time, and the concern is that this is ripping apart the fabric of society. You see the news do these things, there's always an agenda. So when Eugene Peterson comes out, the Matthew Vines and the Jonathan Merritts and the Andy Stanleys and Jen Hatmakers and all these people, oh, we're all excited. Oh, look, we're so progressive in evangelicalism now. We're moving away from those things that held us back in the past, and we're changing things, and the media is all over it. It's great. Now, they never report the downside, but you can see that there's an agenda in the media. And here's an example. The New York Times came out with an article this week called Israel's War Against George Soros. Now, this is stunning that they would say this. What war did they engage in against George Soros? It says this, and it starts out with this. Now, what do we know? There's questions about what Soros did back during the war, and the conclusion of a lot of people is he was on the wrong side of people in the Holocaust. He actually served with the Nazis. So what do they say? And this is the New York Times. Now, you need to know this article is written by a guy at the 972 Mag blog, which is a virulently anti-Israel Jewish publication or website. So he writes this, and what's he start off with? As a Holocaust survivor. That's what you would think of when you study the history of George Soros. And it's just terrible what he does. He goes on because Israel and the Prime Minister of Hungary attacked Soros, who's Hungarian. And this is just terrible. It's just so bad that he's doing this. But so Daniel Greenfield, who's an Orthodox Jewish man, writes for Front Page Mag and some other places. He is one of the writers. I will read what they write. Caroline Glick, Daniel Greenfield, Melanie Phillips, I think are good thinkers. They're not Christians. We acknowledge that. But they do. And so he called this the Jew washing of George Soros. Listen to a little bit of what he says. What does this war consist of? Has Israel sent drones to the Soros estate? Did Mossad agents drag George out of his featherbed to face the justice of those injured through his actions? No. The war consisted of one statement. The Israeli Foreign Ministry condemned Soros for continuously undermining Israel's democratically elected governments and backing hate groups that defame the Jewish state and seek to deny it the right to defend itself. Not only is it true, but it's underwhelming what was said. Even by the low fake news standards of today's extremist media, you expect something more from a headline screaming Israel's war against George Soros than a single restrained criticism. Did the thousands of hit pieces from the New York Times count as a war on Israel? That includes the aforementioned Mariav Zonstein screed on Soros, which in true Soros-esque fashion pivots from defending an anti-Semite to launching bizarre and hopelessly factless smears at the Jewish state. Soros and the Times align with the liberal autocratic Muslim Brotherhood's takeover of Egypt under a leader who had urged Muslims to nurse our children and grandchildren on hatred of the Jews, but there's nothing anti-Semitic to see there. According to the New York Times, criticizing an anti-Semite whose Jewishness can only be found with a DNA analysis is anti-Semitic, but attacking millions of Jews defending themselves against genocide isn't. The government that represents millions of Jews is anti-Semitic for calling out a left-wing anti-Semite. And the millions of Jews, and probably even the recently deceased Elie Wiesel, probably are too. George Soros hates Jews. So do his apologists and supporters. They just can't say so in public yet. There are 1,000 euphemisms. They're not anti-Semites, they're anti-Zionists. Yes, they just happen to be reviving the Nazi boycott against the Jews, and their favorite Muslim Brotherhood hate groups drew organizational inspiration from the Third Reich. And if you doubt their commitment to opposing anti-Semitism, watch them defend George Soros. Then when Jew washing is done, they can go back to demanding that we fund the terrorists murdering Jews. George Soros is not a Holocaust survivor. He has spent his life collaborating with totalitarian movements whose goal is the extermination of the Jewish people. He is not a victim of anti-Semitism. He is a perpetrator of anti-Semitism. And good for him. That's exactly right. Everything Daniel Greenfield said in that article is true. But the media has an agenda. We see it each week. We see, I'm concerned with the way the Trump administration is going in respect. I mean, I know they're attacked all the time. I'm concerned that part of the disarray that appears to be going on there may be related to the fact that he's trying to push peace agreement on Israel. And I think he needs to back off of that. Why don't you just back off of that for a few months and see what happens, see if things improve. I suspect that they would, but that's just me. So I'm going to talk about this in the Middle East, then we'll talk about Jerusalem. Real quick, Mosul. Now, if you want to read about, Mosul is the area within the city limits of Mosul, is historic Nineveh in the Bible. If you want to read prophecies about Nineveh, you can go to the book of Nahum. And it talks about the destruction of Nineveh. And based on the things that I reviewed this week, and I'm going to show you, that may be one of those prophecies that has a double fulfillment, because modern day Mosul, ancient Nineveh, is effectively obliterated. And that's what this one aid worker says. If you look at the pictures, this is a place in Nineveh. Look at these buildings. This is central Mosul. There were thousands of people killed. There were a lot of airstrikes done by the United States and others to drive out ISIS. I can show you a picture of an ISIS guy won't, of an ISIS fighter that they hung on a pole, and all that's left is a skeleton. I guess the crows or vultures or whatever did their deed on him. Now what's happening is the Iraqi troops are going through Mosul, and they're engaging in revenge killings because the ISIS was Sunni, and the main fighting contingents are Shiite that are coming from Iraq and taking the city back. It's a very densely populated area. Think just, you talk about zero lot lines, you know, if there is, it's house, 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 house. I mean, it's everything is up against the other. And now there are probably 1 million refugees that are being driven out of Mosul. But look at these pictures. I mean, this looks like Syria. Here's along the Tigris River, you know, there you go, an explosion, you know, a bombing taking place. And this just goes, I mean, look at what's already been bombed in the city. Everything's been destroyed. This is on both sides of the river. The bridges are all out. I think there might be one that's still usable. ISIS, while they had control of things, this was a compound, and they just would go in and they would just blow things up. If you go to the historic Nineveh, you can see in the map here, part of Sennacherib's palace is in this area right here. That's what it looked like in November of 2015, and then a year later, this is what it looks like. They went in and destroyed these historic sites. They put barrel bombs along reliefs that were from the time of Sennacherib, archaeological treasures, and they just went in and blew them up. Here's central Mosul. That's what it looked like last November. Whoops. I think I've got my pictures. Anyway, here's a place. This is a hospital and a hotel there in the center of the photograph. That's what it looks like today. And these are recent digital pictures. You see here on the left, back in November, and this is what it looks like today. The city's effectively destroyed. And there are, as I said, you can see this is a refugee camp in the lower right, and then this is a drone footage taken a short while ago showing just look at the refugees on the move to get out of Mosul. Places where their families have lived for centuries are gone. And so there's 1 million refugees. What are we going to do with those? Where are they going to go? It's a you know, and you empathize with them. So are they going to throw in? Are they going to go someplace? Are they Sunni? Are they going to throw in with ISIS someplace? Because ISIS was at least getting them some electricity and that type of thing. I don't know. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's one of multiple humanitarian crises that are happening all over the place. Immigration still continues at a very high rate into Europe, and Europe's already reeling under the weight of that. When you move over to just north of Israel, and a little bit to the east, Hezbollah and the Syrian army are taking up position in the Golan Heights in southern Lebanon. There are reports of Iranian-backed missile manufacturing facilities being built in southern Lebanon. Why? Because Israel keeps bombing their caravans that bring in the missiles and that type of technology, so they're going to say, okay, we'll just build it there. We'll build an underground facility and build it there, and you can try to take care of it. And so the situation is, I think, very tense along the northern border. Iranian-backed Hezbollah has a lot of influence up there. Netanyahu says we're not going to tolerate Iran bases in Lebanon or Syria. There's reportedly also a air base that Iran is building in Syria. And so we see these flashpoints of major conflicts that are taking place, both in, you can see the one down here in the lower left, that's around the Golan Heights. You have there along the Lebanon border, and you have all those things that are still going over in Iraq. And Syria is just, this is sort of shows the ethnic mix in Syria. Effectively what they did, even though some people will deny it, is they bombed the Sunnis enough that they either killed them or they left. And so over half the population of Syria doesn't reside where it resided 6 years ago. Netanyahu, of course, Haaretz was, it's just terrible what he did. He went to Europe, he went to Hungary, and he, of course, they criticized Soros, but he criticized Europe on an open mic. And here's actually an open mic of what he said.
I have to say this. Europe, the European Union is the only association of countries in the world that conditions the relations with Israel, that produces technology in every area, on political conditions. The only one. We have a special relationship with China, and they don't care. They don't care about the political issue. Modi came to Israel now, spent a few days. He said, I have to take care of the interest of India. I need more water, clean water. Where will I get it? Ramallah. The only ones who are conditioning the association with Israel, the European, the EU Association Agreement. It's absolutely, may I say, I think it's crazy. I think it's actually crazy. It's against, I'm not talking about my interest, Israel's interest. I'm talking about Europe's interest. I think that if I can suggest that what comes out of this meeting is your ability perhaps to communicate to your colleagues in the other parts of Europe, help Europe twice. One, don't undermine the one European Western country that defends European values and European interests and prevents another mass migration to Europe. So stop attacking Israel, start supporting Israel. There is no logic here. Europe is undermining its security by undermining Israel. Europe is undermining its progress by undermining the connection with Israeli innovation because of a crazy attempt to create conditions.
Well, that's that was what Netanyahu said. He's right, but boy, Europe, they're just all a Twitter over, oh my goodness, what he criticizes, how dare he. Okay, let's talk about Jerusalem and some of the things going on with respect to Israel in the time that we have remaining. Now, my slides may be out of order because things kept coming in and things kept changing. So let's just sort of, we have this situation going on. This is near in East Jerusalem, not too far, I believe, from the old city. They're refusing to go up in the Temple Mount. We'll explain what's going on in just a moment. Let me see if I can find my starting point, because it does not appear to be there. So a week ago, we talked about the attack that happened on the Temple Mount. There were these 3 Palestinians that came in. They got into the old city. They snuck things in a backpack, and there's video that you can find online about that. They went into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They had a 4th guy to help them. He brought a backpack in with weapons in it. They went into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They changed clothes, and they came out, and they attacked and killed 2 Israeli policemen in the area of the Lion's Gate, sort of between the Lion's Gate and the Temple Mount. And they killed them. One was 20 years old, the other was 34 with a 3-week-old baby. They were Druze. They were Israeli Druze. They weren't Jewish. And Israel, in response, closed down the Temple Mount. They let Jews go up there, and Christians and others go up there, but they closed it to Muslims. Now, they revised that a little bit later to Muslim men over the age of 50 could go up there, but they installed metal detectors at the gates, and this caused a just huge firestorm of complaints and riots. These are the metal detectors. By the way, they're similar to the metal detectors that everybody else goes through. When we walked to the Western Wall Plaza, when we were there a couple months ago, we had to walk through metal detectors to get into the Western Wall Plaza. And if we went through the Western Wall Plaza and went up to the entrance, the Mugabe Gate up to the Temple Mount, the walkway up to the Temple Mount, we would have to go through more metal detectors. And they would inspect your backpack if you had a camera bag or anything like that, because they don't want any weapons getting up there. But now they want to do that from the Muslim quarter up to the Temple Mount, and they're having riots. Now, what's interesting about that is here is a metal detector that's used where? The Grand Mosque in Mecca. They all have metal detectors. We have to go through it when we get on an airplane. But they're using this situation, and I'll explain this more in a minute, to try to create a lot of problems. Here's a little video of, keep the sound down on it, but if you turn it up a little bit, this is outside in East Jerusalem, outside. You can see the Dome of the Rock in the back. And the result of it was there were 2 Israeli policemen killed. In these protests, there were 3 Palestinians killed and 20 or so injured. And this is in Bethlehem and other places in the West Bank, what they call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. They're shooting rubber bullets. They're throwing rocks. Here's what the New York Times quoted Sheikh Mohammed Hussein, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, as saying, "We insist on reaching Al-Aqsa Mosque and performing prayers there. The occupation preventing us from praying marks an assault against our right to worship in this pure Islamic mosque." The Waqf, Jordan's Islamic authority that runs religious affairs of the state and serves as the custodian of the Muslim-administered site, issued a statement on Monday that instructed all Muslims to reject and boycott all the Israeli aggression measures. The authority was not included in the Israeli decision to impose the security changes. So they boycotted the Temple Mount, and they were praying in the streets, and then they had these essentially riots and demonstrations, and Israel had to take some action. Abbas, who heads up the Palestinian Authority, he came out and he said, "We're cutting all ties and communications with Israel." Fatah demanded marches towards Israeli checkpoints in the occupied territories where hundreds of Jewish settlers live, amid a heavy Israeli military presence. They also called for Friday prayers to be held in public squares with sermons dedicated to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, I mentioned this before. When Pam and I were there in May, we went up on Friday morning. We went up to Shiloh, and then we went up to Nablus, where Shechem, biblical Shechem, is located, right in the city. And we were there Friday. The streets were pretty empty when we got there. We had to go through an Israeli military checkpoint. We were with our guide, Joel Kramer, and they waved us through. And as Joel said, it's always easy to get in. It's harder to get out, which we found out later was true. So we went to Shechem. There was nobody there. And then as we're getting ready to leave, you could hear the imams preaching, and they were clearly not preaching love thy neighbor type messages over the loudspeakers that blast all over Nablus, these messages. And later the next day, they had similar demonstrations on the streets of Nablus, where we had just been 24 hours before. And we had to talk our way through the military checkpoint. And at the military checkpoint there coming out of Nablus, There have been soldiers stabbed and killed at that checkpoint. And you can imagine a lot of these guys are 19, 20 years old, 21. They're relative to us, they're kids. And they're nervous, and they check, and you're given a little bit of leniency if you say you're American, or as my guide said, if you ever get stuck at a checkpoint, just go, is this Tel Aviv? Am I at Ben Gurion Airport? And they'll think, oh, I got to let this stupid American through, and it seems to work. But the checkpoints, and when we were there were, I'm going to guess, a couple dozen Palestinian cars and trucks lined up to try to get through the checkpoint, and they had it closed down. There had been a killing the day before up in just about a mile or so away. So everybody was a little bit fired up, and this is what happens. And so now they're saying go against these checkpoints all the way up through what they call erroneously the West Bank. And there's this constant push to get Israel in many fashions. CAMRA, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, has this Palestinian Christian group, this just came out a week ago, or just a few days ago, asked the world. So while all this is melting down in the Middle East and Jerusalem's turning into this flashpoint, Palestinian Christian group asked the World Council of Churches to engage in lawfare against critics. What does that mean? What's lawfare? Well, you know what welfare is? Lawfare is designed, they file lawsuits against people if they criticize Palestinians in their conduct. And they sue them. Now, they're probably not going to win, but what happens in America? You get sued in America, you pay your own attorney's fees, and it can get very, very expensive. And that's how and CARE has been doing this, and others, they figured out the American system that, hey, we can make it financially difficult for people to criticize us. So we'll file a lawsuit against them, whether it's where we're going to win or not. They'll just spend a lot of money. A newly established coalition of Christian institutions in Palestinian society, which calls itself the National Coalition of Christian Churches in Palestine, has issued an open letter that falsely accuses Israel of destroying the Christian presence in the Holy Land, and it has dropped dramatically. It was not too long ago, I think, in areas like Bethlehem, there was 10% or more of the population was Christian. And now it's in the low percentage numbers, probably single digits, because they've been driven out, because they've been persecuted, but they're trying to blame it. They always it seems like they try to blame it on Israel. This is what they've said. This year marks 69 years since the creation of the State of Israel. The General Council wishes to reaffirm its commitment to peace and security for them. And so they have this open letter that they've sent out. It quotes from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. It's interesting that portion of Scripture is showing up in the weekly or daily readings for Jews around the world just this week. And I have time, I may read a little bit from this. As we meet this month in Bethlehem in occupied Palestine, we are still suffering from 100 years of injustice and oppression that were inflicted on the Palestinian people, beginning with the unjust and unlawful Balfour Declaration, intensified through the Nakba. That means catastrophe. And the influx of refugees and Jews, followed by the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, and the fragmentation of our people and our land through policies of isolation and confiscation of land, and the building of the Jewish-only settlements and the apartheid wall. And they are Jewish-only settlements because what would happen if they were mixed? It would be pretty ugly. So they're still blaming everything on Israel. They want to sue people that criticize them. There was also this Israel-Palestine Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church USA. They also came out and supported in their public witness report. This is where I got some of those quotes from. It was 750,000 people kicked out in 1948, which is not true. Now it's 6 million. And it says here, we acknowledge and confess that the Christian faith has been used to justify the injustice against the Palestinian people. Any use of the Bible to legitimize or support political options and positions that are based upon injustice imposed by one person on another or by one people on another strip the Word of God of its holiness, its universality, and truth. All who suffer share in the groaning of the Holy Spirit for the liberation of all peoples. You see the left-wing religious aspect of this, and they're joining in one spiritual communion. The ongoing condition of occupation and the continuing denial of Palestinian rights has cast a shadow over generations of Jewish Israelis who have borne the social, psychological, and spiritual burdens of the role of occupier. You see this, and you see these attacks coming from everywhere. Some of you may be familiar with Roger Waters, who is I believe the bass player and lead singer of Pink Floyd. And here is what he said in an interview with a guy named Argudi, who is one of the founders of the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement, the BDS movement. Just listen to a little bit of what he says. You can find this on Facebook if you just look for his name.
I would rather die than roll over in front of
Now, what he's talking about is he's boycotting Israel. He won't go to Israel. He says all other artists should make a cultural boycott on Israel. And he grew up, his mother was a humanist, an atheist. His father, he said, was a devout Christian. And he went to Israel and he saw the oppression.
Apartheid state like Israel has become, particularly in the occupied territories, where this is a country that is occupying a neighboring country illegally and has done so for over 50 years now. And to not stand up and protest that just because it might be inconvenient in some way is not an option. I couldn't possibly do it. There's no way I could do it. It's not something I could do. This is not difficult. This is one group of people have stolen the lives of another group of people, and they have to give it back, or it has to be taken back. But it has to get back to the people whose lives it is. Cannot have one group of people living under the subjugation of another group of people.
Where the ruthless, right-wing, xenophobic, racist, wall-building leader that you obsessed over was not Netanyahu, but Trump.
I mean, well, you know, obviously anything that I might say now is only my opinion, but the guy's a complete nincompoop. And he's dangerous. He's extraordinarily dangerous. He carries narcissism to the point where he has this extraordinary belief in his own worth. And he probably genuinely believes that he's a great leader and that he has something to offer society or this country, when it's entirely obvious to me and most thinking people that he isn't. He's a buffoon. You know, he's an awful, awful person. If before he'd kind of started his run for president, if you would point, he'd be somebody you'd point to and go, look, that's everything that is wrong with society is absolutely encapsulated in this moron. So that's why I can't concentrate on Michael. I just desperately hope that we can get to the end of these 4 years without him killing us all. Or even worse, if he gets impinged, you'll get that crazy, fanatical, right-wing Christian jihadist, Mike Pence, will be the president of the United States of America. That is scary, because he's a bit more calm and collected than the nincompoop, and much more dangerous, in my view. And much more coherent in his notion that that America should be apartheid, that the Christian right should be the elite, and that everybody else should be subjugated to their will and do exactly what they want them to do, so that women shouldn't be allowed health care and that children should not be allowed to learn Darwinism in schools, that they should teach creationism as science in schools. This is the vice president. And people wonder why I'm obsessed with it. I am. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm laughing because it's laughable, but it's not. It's scary. It's really frightening.
Well, he prattles on for about 50 minutes in that interview. You know, if you want to beat your head against the wall for 50 minutes, look it up on Facebook under Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions and Roger Waters, and you should be able to find it in the search. Now, I'm going to share a couple of videos. This is going to take 20 minutes probably. So we will go over. And I'm telling you, I'm cutting out massive amounts of this. There are all these things that are being reported in the press. Let's see. Jerusalem is especially volatile right now. People tweeting preparation for prayer outside Damascus Gate, chants from crowd, let our blood be shed for the protection of Aqsa. Listen, we can characterize it any way we want. This is what's being fomented there is a religious war over the Temple Mount. There were reports from various things of what we're going to do. They did shut down the Temple Mount. And what was the result when the Muslims boycotted it? Jews went up to the Temple Mount in record numbers. And on, let's see, when was the 18th? That would have been Tuesday. They were praying, openly praying on the Temple Mount because the Muslim walked, the Muslim police weren't showing up because they follow Jews around in big groups all the time, and if they close their eyes, they yank them off the Temple Mount. So they went up there and prayed. There's a report from DEPCA this morning that this is fomented by Hezbollah, and that DEPCA and others believe that we are on the verge of war over this issue in the Temple Mount. After the Temple Mount was closed on Friday night, a Palestinian 19-year-old went into a Jewish settlement family home at Shabbat dinner. Here's the results. That's blood, by the way, on the floor. He stabbed a 70-year-old man, the man's 40-year-old son and 36-year-old daughter, and the man's wife, the mother of the two kids. And they were sitting at the Shabbat dinner on a Friday night just outside of Jerusalem, celebrating the birth of a new grandson. 3 of them are dead. The attacker was neutralized. He survived. He put on, they expected to die for the glory of Al-Aqsa. Hamas came out and said he is a hero for what he did. He's not been criticized by anybody on the Muslim side. There's one other article I wanted to show you. So they closed down the Temple Mount, and Wednesday, this is what happened. And you'll recognize this Jeremy Gimpel, who many of us met when he was here, was it about 2 years ago? Remember, it was a really bad snowy night. He and Ari Abramowitz have a popular radio podcast you can get. They're both rabbis. They are Jewish. They have some interesting insight. And so Wednesday morning, this is what happened.
It's the 25th of Tammuz, July 19th, and this is probably one of the most exciting days that I ever remember. Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, is open up for Jews to actually pray there. I've gone up to Har HaBayit, I don't know how many times, countless amounts of times, and there were always Arab guards from the Waqf, from Jordan, that wouldn't allow Jews to pray. Imagine that in our democracy in Israel, Jews couldn't have freedom of religion, and now for the first time, we're able to go up and pray after the last terror attack on the Temple Mount. Ari's coming to pick me up. We're on our way to the mikveh, and for the first time, we're going to pray as free people in Jerusalem. The heavens are shaking, and I'm going to keep you updated so we can go up to Har HaBayit together, because I don't remember a time where such a significant change has happened in the land of Israel in the last 30 years. All right, we're in our car on the way to the mikveh, on the way to Yerushalayim, and as you can see, the sun is just coming up now over Bethlehem. And this is a historic mikveh going. I don't remember how many times I've gone to the mikveh. I think that if we actually are able to go up to Har HaBayit and pray as free Jews in Jerusalem, I think you're actually supposed to be kovea it as a Yom Tov for the rest of your life. Like the 25th of Tammuz, from this day forth, is going to be a giant celebration.
Assuming we're able to go up and to pray freely and
That's already a
call
problem.
out to Hashem as we would want to do, because there's a chance that the Israeli government may start being like, no, we're going to institute the law even if the Waqf isn't there. That's a possibility.
And that's why we're going up as soon as we can, because we don't know how long this opportunity will last. I mean, we're in the heart of the 3 weeks before the destruction of the temple. We're about to enter into the 9 days before the 9th of Av. And all of a sudden, for the first time in Jewish history, the Temple Mount is being opened for prayer.
And what he's talking about is this 3-week period before the 9th of Av, which was the day that the first and second temple on the Jewish calendar was destroyed. The first temple by the Babylonians, the second temple by the Romans, and it's a period of mourning, and they have readings that they go through. I'll read a little bit of one before we leave today. A couple of them that they look at. They remember this event. It's a period of mourning. They lost their temple, and we are right in the middle. You know, this happens all the time. We're right in the middle of this significant thing on the Jewish calendar. And the readings that they're talking about and what's going on. The Temple Mount is a flashpoint for it could be war. I mean, it really could. It could devolve very quickly into a war. So they got to the Temple Mount. This is what happened.
So we just got to the Old City, and I'm thinking that maybe people need a little bit of background about how all of this happened. There was a terror attack just a few days ago on the Temple Mount, and 2 Druze Israeli police officers were killed. And at that point, Israel obviously said, well, we need to take security measures in order to prevent more terror attacks happening. And they put up metal detectors outside of the Temple Mount in order to ensure that no one would bring up weapons to the Temple Mount, our holiest site. And now the Arab Waqf is boycotting the Temple Mount. We don't want to go through metal detectors. We want to be able to kill Jews whenever we want to kill Jews, or Druze Israeli police officers whenever we want to kill Israelis. And the Israeli government, rightfully so, is saying, well, we're putting up metal detectors, and if you don't want to come to Har HaBayit, don't come to Har HaBayit. But now for the first time, we don't have these Arab guards protecting our lips, trying to guard our hearts from connecting to God. And so we don't know how long this boycott is going to last, but finally, there's a boycott of Israel that we can really get behind. The Waqf should continue to boycott the Temple Mount until Mashiach comes. Amen.
And by the way, when they went up to the Temple Mount, they did a sweep, and this is some of the weapons that they found on the Temple Mount, in the mosque and other areas. So Jeremy, first of all, he goes to the Western Wall.
You know, I just finished my davening here at the Kotel, and I know the Kotel is known as the site that is holiest to the Jews, but it's really not true. And although so many prayers have been brought here, and so many Jews have poured out their heart before God here, I can't help but feel that this wall somehow represents also a barrier to our freedom, a barrier to the next level of Jewish consciousness that we're supposed to achieve. And really, it's a wall. But as I looked up here from where I was standing, it's time for us to go above the wall. It's time for us to go beyond our barriers. It is time for a new era in Jewish history. Well,
Okay, so here's what happened.
and now the question is, am I going to be able to pray up there or not? We're going up now, and I've never seen this many officers that have been stationed to take this group up. There's literally dozens
These are Israeli
dozens of
soldiers
police
and
officers that are following us around now. Just a moment. We're in the middle of the 3 weeks now. We're coming close to Tisha B'Av. Think about how many prayers went up to Shemaim directed at this place. 2,000 years, 3 times a day, every Jew that was alive davening, 4 times on Shabbat, millions upon millions of prayers. From when we were in Russia, we faced the south, facing Har HaBayit. When we were in America, we faced the east, facing Har HaBayit. From all around the world, for millions and millions of prayers. And now, finally, the Jewish people, so close to Tisha B'Av, are now walking feet away from Har HaBayit, feet away from Kodesh HaKodashim. We are literally living the prayers of all of our fathers and their fathers and their fathers. להבין שאנחנו ממש, התפילות נענו דרכנו. התפילות של אבותינו נענו דרכנו, אנחנו התשובה, כן, זכיתם לחזור לציון ולחזור לעיר הקודש. והנה הגענו מטרים מקודש הקודשים, כל הסבים והסבתות והסבים והסבתות שלהם, והנה הגענו, ממש תשובה לתפילה. Now I need to give a little background. We walked around and the Jewish police were so merciful. They really were. They allowed us not to pray with our lips, but they allowed us to pray with our hearts. And they know what that means, and we know what that means. Because very often they don't let us even do that. And we were so close. And usually when we go up there, the Arabs purposefully yell Allah Akbar at us, and the Waqf yelling at us to shush. And it's impossible to enter into any type of meditative state because you see children playing soccer and throwing garbage on our holiest site, and you don't know what to do. Your heart breaks. You feel the exile so powerfully. And for the first time, there was no one up there. There was no one up there except those that wanted to be there to pray and wanted to be there because it's holy to them. And it was just beyond. And I felt so connected to all of the people that were there with me, and I felt very connected to the police officers that were there with me. Some people were crying, and I just felt like truly all of Israel is one body, and all of us are limbs within that body. And yes, the police officers have to do what they have to do, but I have to do what I have to do. And I went up to the police officer and I said, I want you to know, I hope you're not mad at me, and I love you, but I have to do what I have to do. And then my heart just opened up, and as I bowed down right in front of the Temple Mount, I felt as though a spiritual explosion was let forth from my heart. And the police officer picked me up and carried me off of Har HaBayit. It was one of the highlights of my life because it was a little bit scary, and I knew that it wasn't allowed, but I was just being true to what I know is true. And it's true that the Jewish people should have a right to pray as a free people in the land of Israel. It's not fair that the Muslims can pray there, but Jews can't. In our own democracy, freedom of religion is not allowed. That's simply not acceptable to me. And at that point, my heart just opened up, and I had to do what I had to do. And now all of Israel is talking about the Temple Mount. And I don't know what you believe, whether you're a Jew or a Christian or an atheist or a Buddhist, but just basic morality, just the inside of the inside. Why can't Jews pray on the Temple Mount? I think it's time for us to stand up for what's right, for what's just, for what's true, and what's good. And please God, the Temple Mount will become a house of prayer for all nations, and not just a house of prayer for one nation, the nation of Islam, but it will be a house of prayer for all people to come and worship together. And so maybe this was my one step, my one action, my one mitzvah, my one maaseh, to bring the redemption a little closer, to bring peace a little bit closer, because we can't live with this injustice forever.
Now look, we've had Jeremy here, we've spent time with him, we love Jeremy, we pray for him, we pray for his salvation. And he knows this. That night he was here, the gospel was shared with him. So he's heard it. But this is a very significant moment in history. I would encourage you today to read Isaiah chapter 1, which is one of the readings during this 3-week period. And read what it says in Isaiah chapter 1. Know that Jesus himself referred to the temple, prophecies about the coming temple, as a house of prayer for all nations. Not all religions, all nations, because we know that in that millennial kingdom, it's promised that all nations, Persians, former Muslims from Egypt, from Iran, from Syria, from Turkey, will go up to Jerusalem to worship the Messiah, who will sit and rule and reign in a temple built in that area. It's described in Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48 and some of those prophecies. But Jesus himself, so I know people Chris, I share, oh, he's ecumenist, and I'm really concerned about that. Jesus used the same phraseology from, I think it's Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7, a house of prayer for all nations. Jesus talked about it when he was, I made my house of prayer, a house of prayer for all nations, but you've made it a den of thieves. Remember that passage? He's quoting from Isaiah, and I believe a messianic prophecy. And remember, in one of the passages that they've read during the 50th celebration, and this was by the rivers of Babylon, Psalm 137, there we sat down, yea, we wept, and we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof, for there they that carried us away captive required of us a song. And they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. They're mocking them. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. So we see this desire awakening in the Jewish people. And we know how the ultimate redemption comes. And it's coming for a large contingent of them. They've come back to the land from all over, and as Jeremy said, they prayed for thousands, millions and millions and millions, billions of prayers went up about coming back to Jerusalem. And this week, really this week for the first time in about 2,000 years, there were Jews praying on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. That's a pretty significant event. Openly praying. Now, the Israeli government shutting it down now, but we're there for a time. So this morning I thought it might be a good idea to contact my friend Brian Schrager. Brian puts out a great daily, 6 days a week report called the Heim Report, which has a lot of headlines and things. I usually share it on my page every day on Facebook. Go to jerusalemjournal.net/categories/headlines, and you can get it every day. You can sign up and have it emailed to you. And it's posted in a bunch of places on Facebook. So I thought, Brian lives there around Jerusalem. And so I thought, let me give him a call. Because he said this morning in a Facebook message he sent me, don't know if you're getting the news over there, but this is a very serious situation in Jerusalem. So I thought, okay, I'll give him a call. Now, this is the first time I tried this. Skype wouldn't work because he got an Android. Pray he gets saved to the iPhone. And but I highly recommend his report. He wrote an article a couple weeks ago in the Jerusalem Post about a new world order, about the Silk Road, and how that all plays in end-time prophecy. It's a phenomenal article. You should look it up. Just type Brian Schrager, Schraugger, into Google and New World Order, and the article should come up. And you should read it. So here's I'm going to play a little bit. I'm going to kind of fast forward through a little bit of the interview I just did with him over there during first service. So why don't you tell me where you're at right now, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Jerusalem.
I'm a few minutes outside my front door on a hill in the hills of Judea, and I don't know how well you can see using this camera phone, but in the background below me is Bethlehem, and then on the horizon, although it's a hazy day, you can see the Herodian, which I think you visited when you were here.
We did, and I think I can see it over your right shoulder, just right above some of the houses. Yeah. It looks like the top of the Herodian.
Yep, that's it.
So we're not getting a lot of news from American news sources about what's going on in Jerusalem with the Temple Mount especially. Why don't you just give us a little recap of what your observations are and where you think this thing is headed?
Well, it's exploding. As you know, about a week ago, there were some Israeli police officers killed on and near the Temple Mount at the entrance to it in the old city of Jerusalem. Everything was caught on film. Reports later came out that the cell which carried out the terror attack was probably from Hezbollah, financed and directed by Iran. So there's more going on here than just something in Israel. There's a regional thing happening here that resulted in Israel saying, shutting down the Temple Mount, something they've not done, I think, in 50 years.
And can I ask you
Muslim worship.
Can I ask you just a quick question about Hezbollah? Because Hezbollah really, to this period of time, has not been a major factor in terrorist acts within Israel. Is that right?
Not that we know of, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if this report's true. Apparently, it, according to an Israeli intelligence news agency called Debka, it is Saudi Arabia intelligence and Jordanian intelligence that has fingered the Iranians in this.
That's interesting. That's a little bit of a game changer, isn't it?
I think it is. This is not just a flare-up of Palestinian violence. This is something that is being deliberately directed and incited by Israel's sworn enemy.
So, where was this terrorist? Where were these terrorists from? Like outside of where in relation to Jerusalem?
They were from the Jerusalem area. I don't have the details at my fingertips in terms of the cell that they were in, but there is video that's easily accessible on the internet that shows them coming into the Temple Mount with a third party carrying weapons, going onto the Temple Mount into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, coming out with a change of clothes, and then going back just before they carried out the attack, which killed 2 Israeli policemen, which, by the way, were not Jewish, they were Druze.
Now,
Israeli.
and the attack happened at the Lions Gate, is that right?
It happened very close to the Lions Gate, yes.
Okay, sort of in that area between the Lions Gate and where you would go up to the Temple Mount.
Exactly.
Where you and I were not too long ago, actually, a couple months
right.
ago. It's hard to believe it's been like 9 weeks that we did that update with Bill Koenig down there in at the Promenade back in May. And they came in, it looks like I have the video, and I'll be playing the video in the update of them coming in. I found it on one of the Israeli websites. And it's very clear what they did and how they carried this out. Now, okay, I'm going to fast forward this. What I'll do is I'll put up, I'll try to put up on my Facebook page the entire interview. So if you have access to Facebook, just go to John Haller, and we'll see that. And so let's just play the last few minutes of this. If that collapsed, what would be the impact on that? Because those people they won't stay there; they'll go someplace.
Talking about Gaza,
and that has huge implications for security there in Israel.
It's a very, very difficult situation. Right now, the infrastructure in Gaza is...
The reports have been, and he'll talk about the infrastructure, but reports are Gaza will cease to exist as an effective place in 3 to 10 years, maybe shorter. Close to 2 million people live in Gaza. Where are they going to go?
Is crumbling because Abbas, here in Judea, Samaria, the so-called West Bank, has cut off funding to pay electricity. And so they're only getting power a couple of hours a day. Israel, in response, has been talking with Egypt. It's reported to perhaps bring in an alternate leader, someone who's a competitor with Abbas to lead the Palestinians. Whether they can pull that off is anybody's guess. There are a lot of things happening behind the scenes. Reportedly, Egypt and Saudi Arabia are talking, and the U.S. are consulting with Israel behind the scenes to bring some kind of a resolution to this, or at least to turn the temperature down. Clearly there are forces on one side to turn it down, and on the other side they're doing everything they can to crank it up.
And so it's just something, I mean, if you put it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most serious, when I was there in May, you would probably put it down, the situation at what, a 1 or a 2 or a 3 maybe?
Yeah.
Not very tense. Everybody's kind of getting along. And now, where would you put it on that 1 to 10 scale?
It's high. I would say it's an 8 or a 9.
Yeah.
It
And
has really gone up. It's happened very quickly, as it does here.
yeah, it can change over. It can change by the hour. Um, and I mean, I saw the riots. You know, some of the protests going on down there by where we had stopped and had some food that day down there near the Damascus Gate, which was very peaceful and lovely that day. And now it's just rubber bullets being shot and water cannons and that sort of thing. You've lived there for about what, 6 years now?
A little over 5 years.
5 years. And is this as tense as it's been since you've been there?
It's as tense as it was at least back in 2014 when during the war with Hamas in Gaza. Yeah.
Yeah.
During that time, there were missiles being fired, and one or two actually were fired from Gaza that came as toward Jerusalem. They actually hit in the Bethlehem area, and it was pretty tense at that time. Walking around the old city, there was just an atmosphere of real heaviness. It's at least that tense now.
Wow. Well, look.
Only now, this time, unlike 2014, that was very clearly an Israel-Hamas issue. Yeah, this one is much bigger. It's much broader. It's all about. It's focused on Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is always used as an excuse to, or as a motivator to incite Islamic passion against Israel, and the cry to protect Al-Aqsa because Israel's trying to take it over is being sounded in mosques around the Middle East and in protests that are taking place in countries around the Middle East, including Turkey. I know they had a major protest there on Friday or Saturday.
Right. There's also some protests in Jordan and Malaysia, another Islamic country. But it's interesting. The one thing that I notice is you're not getting much comment on this from the other Arab states. They're sort of laying back.
Yeah, and one analyst wrote today that he thinks that's because Egypt and Saudi Arabia, who have been quiet, are working, scrambling behind the scenes to try to turn the temperature down.
Interesting. Well, look, so I'll put that up, and so it's very complicated. A lot of things going on, very volatile. To pray about the situation. We're commanded in Scripture to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We know that these things are going to happen. That there's certainly the question of Jerusalem, the controversy of Jerusalem, will be a dominant factor between now and the end of the age. It's prophesied. So don't get upset about it. It should be. Look, it's distressing. The people who graciously provided us a place to stay in Jerusalem when we were there in May, they're there right now at their apartment. And he sent me a picture, and he said, we were on the Temple Mount this morning on July 19th. He said, look at this group. And I sent him the video of Jeremy, and he said, that's the group we saw. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't stay around for the end. He said it was wonderful up there because it was very peaceful and quiet. So, well, obviously we could go on for a long time. I know Brian and I, we've talked on the phone a couple times, and we say, oh, just 15 minutes, and then 2 hours and 15 minutes later, one of us, has to go eat lunch before we pass out or something like that. So he's very knowledgeable, great guy. Get the Heim report, follow it every day. It's worth it. And the day, he updates it, all the time during the day. And this morning, just the headlines are just, as I said, I could sit here with my phone and just go down through each headline and talk about all the things that are going on, the geopolitics of this. You just layer all these things together. It's a very volatile time to be alive, but it's exciting too. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thanks for the confidence we have as believers in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And Lord, pray that we will
share that truth with people at this time. Bring people our way so that we can share the gospel with them. Keep us strong, resolved, committed to your word and to your Son, Jesus Christ. Just pray that you will give us wisdom and discernment in a very confusing time. But fill us with your Holy Spirit. Direct us to good information and solid teachers to help explain and understand the times. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.